Every morning an old man came to the same train station. He always arrived at exactly 7 o'clock. He wore a dark blue coat and carried a small brown suitcase. He sat on the same wooden bench and watched the trains, but he never bought a ticket or got on a train. People at the station had become used to seeing him. Some people called him strange, while others thought he was simply lonely. Nobody knew why he came there every day. One cold morning, a young man named Daniel noticed him. Again, Daniel had seen the old man many times before. That morning, something felt different. The old man looked tired and held an old photograph in his hands. Daniel looked at the photograph from a distance. It showed a young woman smiling beside a train. Daniel became curious and decided to talk to him. Daniel walked over and said, "Good morning, sir." The old man looked up and smiled. "Good morning," Daniel pointed toward the photograph and asked, "Is that your wife?" The old man looked at the photograph for a few seconds. "Yes," he said, "she was my wife." Daniel sat beside him and asked, "Are you waiting for her?" The old man looked toward the railway and quietly answered, "Yes." Daniel was surprised and asked, "Where is she?" The old man looked at his watch. "She promised me she would come back on the morning train." Daniel wanted to know more, but the old man remained silent. A few minutes later, a train arrived at the station. The old man stood up and carefully watched every passenger, but his wife was not there. The train left, and the old man slowly returned to his bench. The next morning, Daniel came back to the station. The old man was sitting in exactly the same place. This time, Daniel brought him a cup of coffee. They started talking, and the old man finally decided to tell him his story. Many years ago, he and his wife were young and deeply in love. Thomas worked at the train station when he was young. One summer morning, a beautiful young woman named Anna arrived at the station. She was carrying a small suitcase and looking at the train schedule. Thomas noticed that she looked confused. He walked over and asked if she needed help. Thomas showed Anna the correct platform, but the train was delayed. They started talking while they waited. They talked about their families, their dreams, and the places they wanted to visit. When the train finally arrived, Anna had to leave. Before getting on the train, she smiled and said, "I hope I see you again." The next morning, Anna returned to the station. She was not traveling anywhere. She had come to see Thomas. From that day on, they became close friends. Every morning, Anna came to the station. Sometimes they talked for hours, and sometimes they simply sat together and watched the trains. A year later, Thomas asked Anna to marry him. She said yes. They built a small home near the station and lived a simple but happy life. They had 2 children and traveled together whenever they could. The train station became a special place for both of them. One winter, everything changed. Anna's mother became very sick, and she had to leave the city to visit her. Thomas wanted to go with her, but he had to stay because of his work. Before Anna left, she hugged Thomas tightly. She promised, "I will come back tomorrow morning." Thomas smiled and told her, "I will be waiting for you." Anna kissed him goodbye and boarded the train. That was the last time Thomas saw her. The next morning, Thomas arrived at the station at 7 o'clock. He waited on the platform, but Anna was not on the train. Thomas waited for the next train. Still nothing. He called her phone, but there was no answer. He called her mother, but nobody answered. Hours passed, then days passed. Finally, Thomas received a terrible phone call. The train Anna had taken had been involved in an accident. Many people had been injured and some had died. But Anna was not among the names they could identify. Thomas refused to believe that she was gone. He believed she was alive somewhere. Maybe she had lost her memory. Maybe she was in a hospital. Maybe she was trying to come home. Thomas made a promise to himself. He would wait for Anna at the station every morning. The first year was difficult. The second year was even harder. But Thomas continued to wait. They begged their father to stop waiting, but Thomas always gave the same answer. She promised me she would come back. 20 years passed, then 30. The station changed, and the old buildings disappeared. New trains arrived, and new people came and went. But Thomas remained on the same bench every morning at 7 o'clock. One day, Daniel asked him, "Do you really believe she will come back?" Thomas looked at him and said, "I don't know." Daniel was surprised and asked, "Then why do you still wait?" Thomas smiled and looked at Anna's photograph. Because waiting is not always about knowing the future. Sometimes, waiting is about keeping a promise, Thomas said. Daniel thought about his own life. He realized that he had spent years being too busy. He rarely called his parents and always told himself that he would visit them later. But later never seemed to come. That day, Daniel decided to call his mother. They talked for almost an hour. For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt truly happy. The next morning, he returned to the station. He brought Thomas a cup of coffee. They sat together and watched the trains. Months passed, and Daniel and Thomas became good friends. Daniel came every morning. Thomas told him stories about Anna, their first meeting, their wedding, their children, and their small garden. But one morning Daniel arrived at the station and noticed something strange. Thomas was not sitting on the bench. Daniel searched the platform and asked. Then Daniel noticed a small brown suitcase beside the bench. It was Thomas's suitcase. Daniel opened it and found Anna's photograph inside. There was also a letter with Daniel's name on it. With shaking hands, Daniel opened the letter. It said, "Dear Daniel, if you are reading this, then I have probably stopped coming to the station. I want you to understand something. For many years I waited for Anna because I loved her. But I also waited because I was afraid to let go. You helped me understand that life is still moving. The trains keep coming and the trains keep leaving. We must sometimes choose to move forward too. Thank you for sitting beside me and listening. Most importantly, thank you for reminding me that there are still good people in this world. Please take care of your family. Call the people you love. Tell them how much they mean to you. Do not wait too long, Thomas." Daniel could not stop his tears. He looked down the railway, and for the first time, the bench was empty. But somehow, Daniel felt that Thomas was finally at peace. Years later, Daniel became a father. Every morning, he took his daughter to the train station. They would sit on the same old wooden bench. One day, his daughter asked, "Daddy, why do you always bring me here?" Daniel smiled and looked at the railway. He remembered Thomas and his story. "Because this place taught me something very important," Daniel said. His daughter asked, "What did it teach you?" Daniel looked at her and answered, "Never wait to tell someone you love them." A train arrived and the doors opened. People stepped onto the platform and the train left again. Daniel watched it disappear into the distance and smiled. He finally understood the old man's story. Thomas had spent his life waiting for someone to return. But in the end, his greatest gift was teaching another person how to live. From that day on, Daniel never said, "I'll do it tomorrow." He called his family, visited his parents, and spent time with his daughter. Whenever he passed the old train station, he always looked at the wooden bench. Sometimes he imagined Thomas sitting there with his brown suitcase, watching the trains and waiting for the person he loved. Daniel always smiled and whispered, "Thank you, Thomas. The train disappeared into the distance. The station became quiet again, but the old man's story never disappeared. Because some people leave our lives, but the lessons they give us stay forever.